Gentlemen. Yes. يلا بتكفوا بعدين. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Joseph Bahout. I'm the director of IFI at AUB, and in the name of the Institute, I'm very happy to welcome you. Very quickly, a few words before I hand it on to Albert Kostanian, who will moderate this session. Just wanted to tell you that we're very glad here at IFI for today's event, because this is really the official public launching of something very important, which is the Arab Think Tank Network. The Arab Think Tank Network is a gathering of 20 Arab networks from Morocco to Iraq and from Turkey to the Gulf. This has been established 2 years or 3 years ago in a joint initiative between the Middle East Council for Global Affairs, hereby represented by Dr. Tarik Yousef, a very dear friend of myself and of IFI. Tarik, thank you very much for the initiative. And it was then also an initiative joined by IFI. We launched this network in order to build a stronger cooperation between think tanks and institutions of the Arab region in order to harness and exchange our know-how, our ways of work, our difficulties also. We are working in a very difficult environment in this region on many levels, political, financial, funding, etc., but also progressively to build an Arab voice on many issues as of now, on political levels, on economic levels, on social levels, societal levels, and others. The second reasons, the network held its meeting yesterday, the organizational meeting for the network, and today we devoted to the day for substance, for content. And the issue that we chose to start the network's activity with is exactly the topic of tonight, building an Arab voice on the governance of global public goods. So we devoted the day today. It was a closed session between 20 think tankers on this issue, and we wanted to crown the event and our gathering this year with this public event of tonight, which will publicize and socialize the ideas that we have discussed today and yesterday. So this is why I'm very happy, because it's the launching, the official public launching of this network. I think this network will make a difference, and I'm convinced of that, in the region and in Lebanon, of course. And I'm happy because we are welcoming very dear friends tonight to discuss these issues, and especially also our fellow Albert Kostanian, also a dear friend of the Institute and myself. And so I will handle it to him to moderate this session, and welcome again and hoping to see you. Last remark, this event is live streamed. It's also translated simultaneously in Arabic. So if some of you would like to use a headset, please raise your hands, and we will give you one. Okay, so everyone is at ease in English. Thank you so much, and good luck, Albert, for that.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. I'm really honored to take part of this event, especially that it's the launching of a very promising initiative. So tonight, our session will be with 3 distinguished guests. It will last for 45, 50 minutes. and then it will be followed by interaction, questions and answers with the attendants. Also on the remote attendees could also convey their questions. So I'll present Tarik Yousef. So Tarik Yousef is a senior fellow and advisor of the Middle East East Council on Global Affairs. Prior to that, he served as a senior fellow and director of the Brookings Doha Center, and he was as well at the Brookings Institution in Washington. His career is very rich. I'll try to synthesize. So his career has spanned the academic and think tank world at the School of Foreign Service of Georgetown University, the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School, and the Global Economy and Development Program at Brookings, amongst others. Yousef has served as well on the boards of many international and regional institutions. Roula Majdalani joined the International Center on Agriculture Research in Drylands, ICARDA, in January 2022 as a senior climate advisor. Prior to that, she served as the director of the Arab Center for Climate Change Policies and cluster leader of natural resource sustainability at the UN ESQUA. Also a very rich career. She has served on a number of international research and development boards. Ishac Diwan is a professor of practice in economics at the American University of Beirut. He's a former senior economist and country director at the World Bank. He worked across Africa and the Middle East on macroeconomic policy, debt, and development strategies. He has held academic posts at Harvard, Columbia, and the École Normale Supérieure in France. Diwan research examines the political economy of the Middle East, focusing on authoritarianism, social contracts, and economic fragility. And he has published widely on finance, development, and Diwan is also an IFI Associate Fellow. So this being said, you are all experts in our region and in the topics of matter. So I will start by a broad question, maybe to Tarik. So in the session this morning, everyone agreed practically that we are shifting eras. We are in a new era of deglobalization. Is it the end of globalization? Probably not, but it's a slowdown. It's the return to local, regional economies. So will the Arab state benefit of such a context? Will they be able to create a network among them to benefit from a shifting international dynamics?
That's a big question.
Very broad. Don't take the hour, but we can.
Maybe it's fair to say that, or to be precise on the first statement you made, that globalization has been paused. I think that would be a fair summary of what we discussed this morning. Could there be a complete reversal or a partial significant reversal of all the gains from globalization over the next few years, as we have seen in the last few months? Possible. Might there be a correction to the dislocation caused by the Trump administration and the uncertainty introduced? That's also possible. Could we see perhaps an emergence of coalitions of new countries that will try to preserve the system? That's also possible. And so there's a lot of uncertainty about the future of globalization. What we can probably say is that the processes we've witnessed over the last 20 years have now been paused. There's tremendous uncertainty and dislocation that's coming out of Washington on the back of policies that have been pushed by the Trump administration. Where the Arab world would fit, it obviously depends on the course of the change. But it would be fair to say, without even the knowledge about where we would be 3, 4, 5 years from now, that not every Arab country benefited from globalization or partook in globalization or actually committed to globalization. When you think of trade and capital flows and services, not every Arab country has managed to integrate itself and benefit from globalization. And I'm sure you will come back to this. When you say the Arab world, we're talking about many Arab worlds. So we're talking about the Gulf, are we talking about the Levant, are we talking about North Africa? And given the state of the Arab world today, fragmentation, lack of coordination, limited cooperation between countries, and that's why we say there are many Arab worlds, I worry that if the uncertainty and the dislocation of the moment continues and the system begins to reconfigure itself, the Arab world as a whole is not going to be ready. And many countries will probably fall behind, and maybe just a few countries will be able to influence the contours of the future of the international system. And so a lot of uncertainty about your question and worries that the weaknesses, the fault lines, the divisions between the Arab worlds might become further magnified over time, depending on how things proceed, but especially if the system begins to dramatically fragment, reconfigure itself. You might see blocks of countries and new coalitions. Unfortunately, the state of the Arab world does not prepare it to deal with these potential outcomes in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Tarik. Roula, in the same context and more related to climate, climate is a global subject per definition because local action or national action have maybe little consequences on a global challenge. So how to address this global subject in times of deglobalization?
Thank you, Albert. Climate change requires not just globalization, it requires a mood of collaboration, of cooperation. And it's not just a movement of goods and services or learning from the different regions, but believing that it's a common planet, it's a common shared future, or even now with climate, we're talking more of the shared present, because climate change is no longer in the future, but it's now happening, and extreme events, climate disasters are really telling us a story of how bad things are moving in that direction. So that commitment is not happening. And probably when you look at of all the global agendas that have been enacted and adopted, maybe the Rio principles of 92 tell us a story of really strong commitment with binding agreements, like the common but differentiated responsibility, the polluters pay principle, that increasingly developed countries are moving away from, and big polluters are moving away from. And it really puts a lot of strain on the global south, on developing countries, but also within developing countries. There is really a mood, because of this what you call deglobalization, of looking internally, and we are missing on the opportunity of working together, of working for a common future. So this is a path that needs to be reversed. We need to find where are the win-win situations. We need to find that the complementarity. And today we were talking about there are comparative advantages that we need to look at. Probably it takes a lot of political commitment in that sense. what happened in 92, there was really hope that we were moving into a one world. It turned out to be a unilateral world that brought its disasters with it. But we really need to be rethinking how that shared responsibility and shared future of the planet will affect us all if we don't act. But I just want to highlight also that that the problem is that developed countries have taken much more, and moving towards a few, they are retreating from their commitment to support developing countries in order to address the climate challenges and the problems of impact of climate change on them. And this is where really you find that mismatch.
So a lot of challenges ahead in this particular topic. Is how to come back a bit to the region. We can ask ourselves also maybe to lay down to criticize the present. Why did Arab nation fail to promote like open borders in terms of trade, capital inflow, migrations, people movement? What maybe failure is an understatement or an overstatement from me. So what is the exact situation and why did we get there?
Right. I mean, first I must say, really, the day was amazing because we had these 20 plus Arab think tank around the table discussing global policy and regional policy. So
yeah.
In part answering your question, but in part saying, we're 10% of the world. There are big global issues that have to do with climate, with finance, with trade, with the end of Pax Americana. The world can be going in many different directions. Where do we want it to go, and how can we exert the influence we have the right to exert so that the world moves a little bit in the direction where we want it to go? This gets us to, what kind of region we want. But part of succeeding in having a successful region is getting international governance in a way that is helpful for the region. For example, if we end up after Pax Americana with two big diverging blocs, the Western and the Chinese, the GCC, which is kind of a rising power right now, would be selling oil somewhere, buying security somewhere else. We would be divided between two blocks, and we would be a divided region, basically. So that would weaken the region. Now, in terms of where the region could go, Roula spoke about climate change, the end of oil. So on the negative side, or maybe on the positive side, we're going to lose over time $1 trillion of revenue per year in the region. So everything we know about the region is an emanation of this $1 trillion coming every year.
The oil revenues.
The oil revenues, exactly. And so, a big part of what we become is also defensive. How to make sure that as this comes down, as the world consumes less oil, we remain the last region to offer oil, because after all, the cost of production are the lowest here. I think to do that, you have to be a responsible region globally in terms of security, in terms of greening and the like. And we have not to fight with each other in terms of who would stop producing first, right? So how to build this kind of security arrangement in the region, which wasn't really needed in the past, becomes extremely needed. So now, as we speak of we spoke of the three regions, how to kind of unite the three regions so that this is a region at peace and a region that can be productive. Before we even dream of what kind of integration we have the world, is very important. So we have right now a rising GCC. The traditional capitals, Damascus, Alexandria, Beirut, Baghdad, have become a periphery.
Levant.
Right? And this is 400 million people, the middle income countries. Together, they have a GDP of $2 trillion, more than the Gulf, about double. So we cannot have a region just with the Gulf and a broad periphery. That periphery has to become the productive part so that capital and labor can come together. You cannot diversify production when oil ends in Qatar, because Qatar has 500,000 people. You cannot diversify production with such a small place. But in a deglobalizing world, we can diversify production, a regionalizing world, with a broad market that combines capital and labor. And we cannot afford to have 100 million people in utter poverty in failing states, the third rung in this Arab world, Yemen, Sudan, Syria. And so it becomes the responsibility of the region in a deglobalizing world to actually integrate that region. So that's on the defensive side.
Very interesting. So you are highlighting the importance of the Levant and of the countries that are in crisis as a contributor to the regional economy that cannot just rely on the GCC countries. And so if we depart from this idea, what can we learn, Tarik, from the crisis of those regions? So Ishac highlighted the crisis. We have 2 or 3 crises that are on the verge of resolution, if we can say it like that. So Syria, maybe Iraq, maybe Lebanon, but we have also open crises in the region like Palestine and Sudan, for example. So what did we learn from a coherent response, a regional response? Did the movement of refugees, the movement of people between those countries in crisis and the Arab hinterland, let's say, meet the expectation or the challenges?
I think, Albert, you've said a few things that I agree with and a few things that yes. Yeah. I mean, let me try to answer your question, building on what was just said by my colleagues.
Yeah.
Because you've asked a question about the state of the Arab world today and a question about the future of this region, given deglobalization and the uncertainty about the international system. I think building on, again, on what my colleagues have just said, we're talking about multiple Arab worlds. A Gulf that's rising, that's confident, that's prosperous, that's much more integrated within the international system, as in a better position to benefit from whatever happens within the international system. And think of the relationship between Gulf leaders and Trump.
Yeah.
It's very personal, it's very transactional. They have access to him. He calls them, they call him, they make deals. Nobody else in the rest of the region can do that, assuming Trump is going to be around or Trumpism is going to be around. You've got the middle-income countries that are sort of neither here nor there. Uncertainty, conflicts around them. They're uncertain about the future course of globalization, trade and finance and everything. And you've got the failed states that are sort of outside of the game. I think the way that Ishac was, I think, framing it absolutely correctly. If things continue the way they are, it's the Gulf countries most likely that will gain more, and the others probably will fall behind or not necessarily benefit. But if deglobalization continues, and as a result, trade becomes more regional, and you begin to see regional trading blocks or regional economic blocks, it would become in the interest of the Gulf countries then to focus more on the region neighboring them. So instead of only focusing on Europe or Asia or North America, the Gulf countries will have the incentive, the motive, and will have hopefully the interest in developing the kind of economic relationships with their neighbors in the Arab world that will allow for prosperity and mutual benefits. Beyond the globalization question, I would add the following in reference to the second point you've made. For a long time, we've looked at the Gulf as islands of stability. They're far away from conflicts. they're far away from the troubles of the rest of the region, they can go on doing what they want to do and be immune from the troubles of the rest of the Arab world. We took this for granted until very recently. You could hear people saying, islands of stability. This has changed in the last few months. Conflicts in the region, troubles in the rest of the Arab world has now arrived to the Gulf.
Namely Doha, the Doha
Not
attack?
just Doha, the uncertainty around what happens if Israel relaunches an attack on Iran, or a widened conflict that begins to engulf not just Iran, a prolonged one that potentially affects stability, certainty, sense of safety. I think this new development, Albert, where the Gulf increasingly sees the rest of the region's problems encroaching on it, might provide an incentive for the Gulf to start investing more in the rest of the region's stability, security, and safety. If this happens, then in addition to what Ishac said, you might start seeing the beginnings of a regional integration project where it's economics, security, seen as a collective interest for everyone. To me, this would be the best case scenario. Will it happen? When will it happen? We don't know. But again, we're talking about the future, and we're hoping in the context of collective Arab action, collective Middle Eastern economic development and political security, amidst all this dislocation and uncertainty, we're hoping for the best outcome to materialize. The last 2 days, today in particular, our discussions really focused on how could this happen? Which areas could we promote and see Arab countries working together to deliver goods, public goods, and national goods for their economies and for their publics? I hope I've been helpful.
Thank you. You've been very helpful, and it's always good to portray an optimistic scenario in this region, but quite realistic. It's not a dream scenario. Roula, Ishac mentioned a loss of $1 trillion per year of oil output. So we are transitioning from an oil-based economy, not us Lebanese, because we don't have oil, unfortunately, but the GCC, towards something else. So maybe it's a good news for the climate, but a bad news for economies and investment. So how do we transition? How do we accompany this transition?
Building on what Tarik said, the Gulf countries are coming out with, coming of age in a sense that they are really mastering the debate on climate, the different debates on climate. And they are taking even leadership positions in the climate negotiation process, whereby they're saying, okay, you want us to reduce emissions, there is a way of producing cleaner energy, not necessarily producing less fossil fuel, but producing it in a cleaner way. There is the possibility that we need to diversify our economy. We need time to arrive to this diversification. We need to have the technology transfer. We need the capacity building. So under that debate, there is, I think that there are a lot of complexities that need to be unfolded before moving away from the fossil fuel. And it's not for tomorrow. People might think it is for tomorrow, but the more also we invest in renewable energy, the more we see a need for fossil fuel to service that production process of renewable energy.
It's a big paradox.
It is. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're not moving towards renewable energy. It has definitely gaining a larger share, but it still is a very minimal share compared to fossil fuel. So it is a longer term perspective. And I think countries that are oil and gas producing countries remain they remain on the negotiation end to extend the time, to extend the lifespan of fossil fuel. Also, don't forget that it's not just about the Gulf countries, but for example, Lebanon is supposed to become a big oil and gas producing country. We hope so. Israel has started already, and they are in advance, unfortunately, for us. So it is, I think that the debate of moving from an oil producing to a non-oil producing economy, it is complex because countries, it is related to also the price of oil. The more the prices drop down, the more you go further into exploration. So there are still fields that have not been fully. I think in the climate, and if you look at the way the debate has been going on, there has been a big push for phasing out fossil fuel to making it a bit more palpable and making it phasing down. And even with phasing down, the crisis that happened between Russia and Ukraine, countries have gone back to coal production.
Absolutely.
So it is not a certain move or a unilateral move. It takes, again, coming back to your first question, it takes commitment to consume less, to produce more sustainably, to change a way of life, which up until now, rich countries and developed countries are not ready to move on that path.
Perfect. Thank you. So this is a bit less optimistic. So you are drawing a mega trend, but saying that this will take the necessary amount of time, of course, to materialize. Ishac, okay, we've talked many times about 2 or 3 blocks or sub-regional blocks. And in the morning, we had a very nice description of the business model that was prevailing in the past decades. I believe it was Joe that said that, yes, our countries used to export people, and so labor and know-how to the GCC, and in turn, they would import back remittance with the outflows of capitals from GCC country. So now in this changing world, changing dynamics, and with the increased also demand of capital, is this model completely gone? And what will replace that model?
It's gone, right? I mean, we've integrated in the world by exporting oil to the rest of the world and people to the Gulf. And we should be exporting less oil. We see the end of oil somewhere in the horizon. And the Gulf is replacing foreigners with nationals, especially in Saudi Arabia, right? The female labor force participation in Saudi Arabia of nationals jumped from 12% 10 years ago to 34% today, more than in Lebanon. So the social contract is changing massively. And, you know, they have to say thank you to the people that build their countries, but now they need to create jobs for their own people. And so, you know, what do we do in the future? Let's focus a little bit on the middle-income countries, not the Gulf, right? The 400 million people from Baghdad to Beirut to Cairo to all the way to Tunis. Why is it that this region is not successful? After all, geographically, it's just next door to Europe, between Asia, close to oil, it has educated people, a glorious history. I'd say it takes 2 things to be a successful region. It takes some kind of regional elevator, and it takes good governance. Now, we haven't had a good elevator. You know, you look at Southeast Asia, it developed from Japan. You know, Japan became rich and then moved its investment to Korea and then down to Vietnam. That was the so-called flying geese, right? And so, you know, the region had an elevator, and then it moved to China. It's all the same model, the same investment moving around, and now China is the factory of the world. Europe had the European Union. You know, Europe at some point wanted to industrialize the southern Mediterranean, but then it opened up to Eastern Europe. And all the investment moved to Eastern Europe, which converged very quickly towards European standard. Israel became very rich. Israel's $55,000 per capita. Well, it has a free market, a joint market with the EU and with the US. You know, it's unique. It's the only country in the world that has free access to these two markets. And so it's literally part of Europe and the United States. You know, US companies open in Israel in order to be able to freely export to Europe. So they had quite an elevator, you know, a supercharged elevator. We didn't have any elevator. So that's sorely missing. And what could be an elevator for us is basically, you know, the Arab market and Arab capital. That would be the normal elevator. The second issue is governance. We've had terrible governance. And if you look at the art of history, it didn't have to be that way. I mean, we started with, you know, amazing leaders post-independence, young, that wanted to modernize society, educate the people, mass education, industrialization, all of that. At some point, this model of state-led import substitution got tired, as everywhere, you know, as in Latin America, as in Africa. But then it didn't manage to transition to a more open society. You know, we ended with Sadat, with Mubarak, with Ben Ali, liberalizing markets a little bit and not liberalizing polity, right? And like, say, Latin America, that liberalized polity and the market. So we had supposedly a free market, but controlled by autocrats, aging autocrats. And so we got crony capitalism and privileges and monopolies and not enough good jobs. It led to the Arab Spring. And then after the 2011 and in other countries 2019s, we had an autocratic restoration supported by the leaders of the Gulf and by Europeans and others that got afraid of terrorists and refugees and enemies of Israel. And so they supported the autocrats. And, you know, we saw that again in Egypt. Egypt failed. It doesn't have, in Egypt, private investment is 6% of GDP now, worse than under the worst years of Nasser. They just went bankrupt and got a bailout of $58 billion, which is in order not to change and to stay as a failed model. So we really have a governance problem. And I think at this stage, we need to make progress on governance. You know, maybe Lebanon could be the model for the future.
Hopefully. Tarik, yeah, go ahead.
I just feel the need to build on what Ishac has just said, partly because of this is a problem I've thought about for a very long time and I've written about also. My thinking has changed over the years, it has evolved. So I want to build on what Ishac has just said. Sorry, I'll raise my voice. Because this very broad question about what is wrong with the region? Why do we seem to have missed so many opportunities? Not just over the last few years, but over decades, and arguably since independence. I think for a very long time, I did subscribe to many of the factors and culprits that Ishac had mentioned as being drivers of underperformance, of underachievement, of falling behind, whether it's the lack of the elevators, bad governance, issues have to do with gender empowerment, even norms and local customs. All of these were thought to be, and of course, the NTR model is at the heart of all of this. I'd say in the last 10 years, Ishac, especially in the last 5 years, I have come around to the view that at the heart of this has been a region that's been cursed by conflict and international intervention in every aspect of its affairs. So much so that I think I recently said in a public debate with a very dear friend, in the context of discussing the Arab Spring, why did the Arab Spring fail? My response to him was, we had no chance. These revolutions were doomed from the start. They were not given a chance. Everyone conspired to undermine them and defeat them. And while I'm happy to point the finger at all the people in the region and the countries, and there were many of them, I have repeatedly found myself not being able to avoid looking at the outside world. So the so-called enlightened West, their agents and their representatives and their cronies in the region as being the core problem. Not just since the Arab Spring, but I would argue since the independence of our countries in the 50s. It's very hard to escape this as being not just an explanation, but maybe the driving explanation for why this region has been cursed and may not be able to get out of the crisis it's in unless it does restore its sovereignty again and takes full agency of its destiny.
But aren't you afraid to exonerate us from a common responsibility?
We're responsible. We've allowed the outside to do what we have done to ourselves and to become essentially completely exposed, completely unsovereign in some sense as a region. I mean, look at the last week. Israel has bombed 5, 6, 7 countries in the region with complete impunity. Look at a catalog of internal failures that I would say, yes, we are responsible for. But the conventional wisdom in the past has been, and this is why I wanted to share my at least, call it upgraded, enlightened, new position. Because for a very long time, Albert, I do feel like we were taken for a ride. If the events post-October 7th have done one thing, they've shown us the world as we should have been seeing it all along. Not the world that people wanted us to see through different prisms. And I guess I'm expressing also here a lot of guilt over the positions I've taken in the past, where I've subscribed to a lot of ideas. I've come around to seeing that all of this was just a one big hoax.
Oh.
So the conventional wisdom used to say, the problem is with you. The Arab condition has to do with the Arabs, and it has to do maybe even, people went further. Think of the post-9/11 world, and I'm sorry for maybe speaking more than I should. I didn't want to take the discussion in this direction. But we do live in exceptional circumstances. The post-9/11 moment was about what? The search for answers for why 9/11 happened. It's Islam. It's these crazy people. It's their mindset. It's their modes of thinking. Everything in our region became a suspect. The last 10 years, the post-October 7th events should be the starting point for seeing all of this from a completely different prism. And I would say any objective, balanced reading of history since independence would arrive at a very similar conclusion. Don't take my word for it. A very recent World Bank report that was published looking at the sources of growth in the region over the last 50 years identified conflict as being one of the key drivers, if not the driver, of why the region has fallen behind. Now, unless we've started all of these conflicts, and I don't believe that's the case, something else has been at play. And until we deal with that, we're doomed to be where we are.
Thank you, Tarik. This brings us to maybe the most important subject of this discussion, which is governance and sovereignty and institutions and frameworks for common action. So, Roula, you have experience in that from your prior work at the UN ESQUA. So how do you see the efficiency and the raison d'être, let's say, of the existing structure, like the Arab League of States or the international UN organization that are active in our region, like the ESCWA. Are they fit? Are they addressing the challenges, or do we need new institution rather than reforming the modus operandi or how they function?
Maybe not new institutions, but definitely reform. Let me tell you the ideal structure of what these institutions should be. To start with, they are intergovernmental processes. So they are really a forum, whether it's the League of Arab States, there are a number of subsidiary bodies to the League of Arab States, whether it's ESCWA, which is a regional commission and convenes other specialized UN agencies. They have a convening power, and they have the ability or they should lead on bringing that common voice that we talk about. Now, and it's a two-way street that it should play. It definitely translates global agendas to the local, national, local level, but also works on informing the global. Now, does it do it as efficiently as it should? We are not living in a perfect world, so we need to understand that that there are constraints, that politics comes in the interference, that divisions within countries, we should not also be naive in that sense. Countries in the region, they have a lot of commonalities, they have common characteristics, common culture, common religion, common even though we speak about different Arab nations, common and shared natural resources, which is one big single factor that should be really an impetus for collaboration. But countries are, they are maybe to a lesser extent than the West, but they are weak and becoming more and more xenophobe and not working well together. We still have a long way to go as an Arab region to understand that working together, working as one voice, is not one country dominating the others, whereas we've had that pattern throughout. If you look at the history since the national movements of nation building and of independence, countries have tried to look beyond their borders to influence others. Now, for institutions like the League of Arab States, it's a microcosm of that. But it is needed. I think it is needed. I think institutions like the League of Arab States, like ESCWA, have done also, when you look at the great, they have done great progress in terms of informing, in terms of contextualizing development agendas. What ESCWA has done, for example, if you look at the MDGs, I'll just give that example, whereas the world has adopted the MDGs, ESCWA has working on MDG plus. And more specifically, I'll give you an example of MDG 6, which is about access to water and the connection of a household to
so a very
being
positive
connected to water.
But reforms needed.
But what ESCWA has done in that sense, and not just ESCWA, but its partners, its stakeholders, they have looked at the issue and said, yes, okay, it's how many households are connected to water, but do they actually get water? Yeah. What is the quality of water? And that, I think, has contributed to informing the global debate and what came out in the SDGs, for example, on SDG 6, which is about access to water, universal access to water, but has looked at quality, resources, scarcity, and looking at it in a more complex way. So these institutions have that role to contextualize, and they have that role to inform the global
Of course.
scene.
Thank you for that. Before passing through the audience question, I want to remind, please, the attendees, especially remotely, that you can ask your question via the QR code on your screen, and the QR code is here as well. I'll end with you, Ishac. So with a political question, do you think we talked a lot about convergence, about different groups, but maybe more on the economic and social levels? Do you think that a convergence of political ideals and regimes, because we have different regimes in this part of the world, is a prerequisite toward a more integrated region?
I think we've talked a lot about the long term and not enough about the now. So maybe I want to answer this question from the now.
Now, yeah.
I mean, now in Lebanon, we're in the middle of a financial crisis, terrifying financial crisis. The economy is not working, there's no banking, the government is bankrupt, cannot borrow, need to do debt reduction. We need years to sort this out. Now, this is unfortunately not very far from where many Arab countries are right now. So it's an end of a period. Many countries, Egypt, Jordan, Tunisia, certainly, have basically borrowed their way out of these 10 difficult years. And global markets were very cheap, interest rates were near zero. They all have very high debts, and they all are facing, and they cannot roll over their debts because interest rates globally are very high. So they have to repay. They need IMF programs. They need they need austerity. They need reforms. Growth in the middle-income countries has been negative in the past 10 years, imagine. So we are sitting on a volcano. And, we're starting to solve things in Lebanon 6 years into the crisis. Over there, they're trying still to avoid the crisis. Now, how is this going to unfold? Last time we had that was in the 80s. We called it the lost generation of the 80s. It ended up opening up to the market partially and, not politically. How is it going to end up now? We've lived it once before. Would people agree to just, reduce public spending? Public spending on wages in Egypt now is 5% of GDP. They have 25% of the labor force living on 5% of GDP. It's a bomb, right? It cannot continue like this. And their debt is very high. Same in Tunis, same in Jordan, about the same in Morocco. And so, something is about to happen. We're not in a static world. Maybe this time, with the experience of the Arab Spring, people will force governments to open up as a price for changing, would force them not just to tighten their belt, but to really open up the economy, liberalize, allow the private sector, allow small firms, stop defending the big monopolies close to power. There are all kinds of demands and fights that we are living in Lebanon that exist elsewhere. So we first have to go through that phase now in the next 5 to 10 years. Just the last thing, I remind you, Egypt had 3 big crises in the past few decades. The first crisis was solved when Sadat went to Jerusalem and got debt reduction as a recompense for that, right? The second big debt crisis, because they borrowed and spent, was under Mubarak. He went with the Americans to Kuwait and got debt reduction, so bailed out a second time. This is the most populous country in the region. Now, Egypt was given, a big bailout that will last a couple of years. Will Egyptians allow them to basically empty Gaza as a price for another bailout? That's the big question of the day. Or will the Egyptian not allow it? So, the question of how people, agency, not just foreigners, would react to the ongoing problems of today is crucial in the next few years. Then we'll see, how the Gulf react. If the Gulf comes to defend the autocrats again, I don't think we'll have convergence very soon on peaceful terms. On the other hand, it's possible, Nadim was developing this very interesting thesis in the morning, that the Gulf had three moments after the Arab Spring. First, they backed the autocrats. Then they figured these countries are flyover countries. They are useless. Let's go with Israel in the Abraham Accord. And now, in the past few days, they realized this doesn't work. So maybe they would figure we actually need to work with the region to develop all together.
Thank you, Isha. So a lot of uncertainties and maybe turmoils ahead. So we have quite a lot of questions from the audience. So the first one from Dr. Muhannad Mahmoud Al-Arkan. So how can Arab research and think tanks have a stronger influence on global decision makers in shaping the governance of global public goods? Tarik Yousef.
I think we can divide this question between us. Part of why we have established this think tank forum and think tank network is to promote the production of ideas on policy relevant issues for the region. We have 20 institutions representing a lot of countries in the region. Most of these institutions, research organizations, work on many of the questions that are relevant for the future. By creating a network, we're hoping to learn from one another, promote co-production of ideas, and to ensure that we can disseminate a lot of what we produce, not just to each other, but also to policymakers around the region. This is not an easy task. You're dealing in many cases with governments that are distracted, preoccupied, don't have the bandwidth, don't have a lot of analytical capacities. For every paper you write, they want it summarized in a paragraph, and they want the recommendation in a sentence. So there's a lot of work to be done here. What I think, at IFI and the Middle East Council are very happy with is that we found some readiness by all of these organizations to commit to working together over the next few years to promoting exactly what the person who asked the question is hoping to achieve. Will we succeed? We don't know. Is this enough? Absolutely not. We need many, many networks. We need many institutions. We need to change the manner in which we engage with policymakers.
Perfect. We have 20 minutes, so I'll ask you to be straight to the point. Maybe, yes, a question for you, Roula. Do Arab actors, from Alain Kfouri, the question, do Arab actors connect climate issues in policy debate mainly on broader development goals like energy transition, economic diversification, and social equity?
This is high on the agenda.
It is high on the agenda.
It is high on the agenda. The whole question of the energy transition is really coming, I think, throughout the region, and it is attracting actors or stakeholders from outside the energy sector. The climate debate, what is interesting is that the science has been covered. What remains to be looking at is the question of so what? What happens when you change from your question, Albert, from fossil fuel to renewable energy or to cleaner energy? How will this affect the workforce? How will it create jobs? Not just in terms of the emissions. We've sorted out the issue of the emissions. What needs to be sorted out when you're talking about energy transition, how will this be mainstreamed into the productive sectors? How will it be mainstreamed into the different research agendas? And again, I'd like to highlight the importance of looking at its economic cost, the financial cost, the يعني quantifying it, because this is where you really can influence policymakers. If you don't bring in numbers to policymakers, you can talk about the science for ages, it will not click. And as Tarik said, they will tell you, give me the bottom line, give me that one sentence. So you really need to go that step further. And it is being debated outside the energy specialist, but you really need to work much more on quantifying it in terms of impact on other sectors.
Perfect. Isha, so a question from Anonymous. Do you see globalization to be gradually reversing into regionalization? If so, what is your opinion on this?
I mean, definitely globalization has gone too far, not from the point of view of the South, by the way, which has benefited from it. Global poverty has been reduced enormously, but certainly from the point of view of the North, because it wasn't managed very well. Those that gained didn't compensate the losers. So we have a big reaction against globalization politically. Plus, we have the end of Pax Americana, the divergence with China that has risen thanks to globalization. And so, now there are strategic reasons why global value chains cannot be spread all over the place, right? Next time there is a pandemic, Europeans don't want to wait for masks to come from China, and Africans don't want to be the last on the line to get the vaccines. So everybody's trying to produce strategic goods, and the list is longer and longer, closer to home. So in that sense, we have moved to a world that's more regionalized, at least on a subset of goods. Now, it could go further, depending on which scenario we end up with. We may end up with a more democratic multilateralism. We may end up with a world of blocks, or we may end up with chaos. Yeah. So, open question.
Open question, open scenarios. Tarik, a question for you. So based on the elevator theory developed by Ishac, what or who should be the elevator of this region in an optimistic scenario?
That's a great question, and I don't have the answer to it, but maybe I can give you a hint of what I think it would take for this region to thrive economically and become a serious bloc on the global stage. So addressing all the problems and the challenges we discussed earlier, the Gulf being more integrated into the rest of the region, getting the failed and fragile states out of their state of crisis, dealing with the sources of conflict, or at least managing them well, then we're talking about a serious region, the Arab world encompassing all these countries with an important regional integration initiative or a set of initiatives. But I think it will take more than that. I think the region I imagine, the region I would like to see in the future, being a peaceful, stable, prosperous region, is a region that will also bring in two important neighboring economies as part of that equation: Turkey and Iran. That will change the credentials and the capabilities of this region dramatically. But that will also require negotiations, it will require initiatives, understandings, and it might help in a few cases solve some serious security gaps and needs that this region has today, that it sees, that it cannot find any short-term solutions for. So solving existing issues with Iran and finding a way of not just living side by side with Turkey, but bringing the best out of Turkey to serve the interests and the needs of this region. 10, 20 years from now, I think this could become a proposition that will deliver a lot of good.
Thank you. Yes, Ishac, yeah.
I just want to add a little something to that. We keep speaking of the region. We have two countries, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, with a GDP of $1 trillion each. Then we have four countries with GDPs around 400-500. These are Iran, Egypt, the UAE, and Israel. Israel is not in the league of the big guys when it's alone. And then all the others are below 50. So that's the hierarchy. I mean, that's the region.
Yeah, very interesting to see it like that. Okay, I still have one question or two questions. One that is quite interesting also to Tarik about Lebanon. So could you provide examples of Arab state at risk of being left behind? If Lebanon is one, what can it do to prepare for potential global changes?
I think I'm going to hand the mic to Roula and Ishac. Lebanon is a country I follow, but I don't know enough about to be able.
Roula, Ishac.
Can you repeat the question?
So is Lebanon at risk of falling behind globalization, and what can it do to catch up?
Now, falling behind globalization, I won't say that, but definitely, unless we get our act together, we are a failed state. Lebanon has, I think, invented the word globalization way before the word was coined or became fashionable. Lebanese have always been, well, throughout the world, but definitely the challenges are very big. And I think our capacity of resilience is eroding. We've always vented that Lebanon is a resilient state, but that capacity is eroding. We're seeing more poverty, we're seeing more, and what is worse than that, we're seeing more polarization and people not having, really the divide is very scary. And for, especially among the younger generation, from my generation, that it was much more mixed and much more, that there was much more a capacity to understand and face a common, common future. But unless we get our act together, and here I'm not just talking about positions on the regional level, but and not just on the security level, but really positions on the addressing basic needs in the country, basic divisions between the different regions. The poverty issues are unbelievable. Unemployment is unbelievable. It's very high, and I don't want to always sound like I'm pessimistic, but I am really throwing a warning sign that unless we get something done and we get our act together, it's becoming more and more a failed state.
Can I add a little something on that?
Yeah.
Very little.
I still have 5 minutes and two questions, and the cocktail and the reception and the dance party. So yes.
No, I just want to say
ahead.
that on this issue, we have a panel discussion at Isam Faris on next Tuesday at 3:30 on a recovery strategy for Lebanon.
Oh, perfect.
Come, there's a wonderful panel of thinkers on that.
A question for you without any transition, Ishac. So how significant do you think, by anonymous as well, does Arab culture and historical victimhood act as a glass ceiling to their development and modernization?
I mean, I don't know. That's not a question for me. All I would say is right now, Arab language is, I've heard, 1% on the internet, even though Arab population is 10% of the world.
Worldwide.
So there is room for much more content and for lots of work to produce that content. I'd say that Arab culture is a glue for that regional market. And as we move into AI and things where culture and creation and design become much more important than objects, that's a comparative advantage for regionalization and regional interaction. So,
Tarik, the last question is for you. So considering the completely unsovereign state of the countries in the region, how can youth act to aid in the emergence of stability?
It's a great question. And it's a question for them, for that generation to solve.
You are young.
I grew up at a time when I had to think about this. I had to work through it, both mentally and psychologically, and find ways of contributing to change. I think in a lot of contexts, I come from Libya. We had our ups and downs, a lot of failures, a few wins. And then came the Arab Spring, and we thought we'd won the lottery, only to find ourselves now going back in reverse. Youth, the youth of today and the youth of the future are going to find their own way. They're going to find their voice. They're going to articulate the visions that ultimately will help shape our societies. Certainly, when you reach a certain age, you become very humble and modest. When you talk to people who are going to be leading the future of our societies and state, you wish them luck, you give them advice where you can, but I have full trust and faith that they will do a better job, at least than my generation and the generations before.
You're still young, Tarik. So but thank you for this very humble answer. Thank you, Tarik. Thank you, Roula. And thank you, Ishac. And thank you to all the attendees. As a reward for your attendance, we have a small reception in the back room. Thank you. Thank you.